Hey, you geeks! So many items have dropped about Amazon's The Rings of Power since my last video, with the new Empire article marking a clear waypoint.
I have brought peace, freedom, justice, and security to my new empire.
Your new empire?
It is now time to summarize and scrutinize all the news. First and foremost, we must acknowledge that Amazon does not have rights to the Silmarillion. So all my theories based on the chapter The Rings of Power in the Third Age can be disregarded.
So, we can rub this out?
I still accept Galadriel as a warrior princess, though I presume that her mithril leggings will look less like poorly photoshopped spandex in the show. Empire, after all, is a magazine, and magazine covers are not known for depicting women's legs in realistic dimensions. However, the limited source material is actually quite helpful. As we hear the story of the Rings of Power in The Lord of the Rings, but not from the omniscient perspective of Tolkien as translator and historian. Rather, it is from one who actually was there.
I was there, Gandalf. I was there 3,000 years ago.
Yes, in the book, Elrond tells the tales of the Rings of Power at the beginning of his council, and he speaks of him being the herald of Gil-galad to Lindon, and being his standard-bearer in the final battle of the Second Age. The article finally introduces us to Gil-galad. During wartime, he rose to the occasion, and during peacetime, he is fighting to maintain that peace. Oftentimes, that means using people to his advantage, but in the way we wish our real-life politicians were. He strives to bring out the best in everyone. A modern show featuring a noble king? Shiver at the thought. I'm glad they're giving him some inner conflict. Otherwise, he could be neatly shoved into the background as other players take the stage. Though I still anticipate Elrond will be the primary viewpoint character from whose perspective we will view Gil-galad. This will be Elrond's story of him growing through the ranks of Gil-galad's court, leading them both to the fateful slopes of Mount Doom and where the Lord of the Rings began. Yet the Empire article repeats 2 points over and over again.
First of all, I would like to make one thing quite clear.
This is not Jackson's Middle-earth, as we see in the making of Celebrimbor, the Harfoots, and the other Broken Blade. Yet, the show promises to be worthy of Tolkien. I'll believe that when I see it, and I hope to see it. Celebrimbor.
Funny, I thought you were going a whole different direction with this.
Alas, he's probably the greatest casualty of copyright compliance. For the fandom knows him as the greatest smith in Eregion, which is a title that comes from the Silmarillion. Rather, the Lord of the Rings themselves only refer to him as the maker of the 3 elven rings of power who became aware of Sauron's deception. The term maker isn't nearly as hot as the term blacksmith.
After all, he is a blacksmith.
Or if you're on the other team.
Did they say I couldn't do it because I'm a woman?
The showrunners are aware of Celebrimbor's profession. He's an elven smith who was manipulated into creating the Rings of Power. We're excited to be bringing him to Middle-earth. He's very mysterious. Though due to a lack of inherent hotness, I suspect the Rings of Power is going to tell Celebrimbor's story as one about a mad scientist getting caught up in the pursuit of knowledge.
It's not your fault you didn't know what you were doing.
Well, actually, I think I did.
And even old science-y men can work a forge. Let's not forget that Doc Brown was a blacksmith in the Old West.
As a scientist, I can never take that risk.
I wonder, as we see Durin toasting the elves of Lindon, and Gil-galad is also there, will we see the making of the Door of Moria? As in the book, the door was signed by Celebrimbor as a token of their friendship.
It reads, "The doors of Durin, Lord of Moria, speak, friend, and enter."
Though the article promises Moria will be unlike anything we've ever seen. So maybe the gate comes later. I believe Lindon and Moria are going to start on the precipice of greatness, and this season will feature the great things elves and dwarves can make together before it all goes terribly wrong. Concerning Harfoots. The show has been adamant that Harfoots are Hobbit forerunners. They are not hobbits yet, which is in keeping with the spirit of Tolkien lore, at least. The Lord of the Rings prologue explains the beginnings of hobbits lies far back in the Elder Days that are now lost and forgotten. Hobbits had, in fact, lived quietly in Middle-earth for many long years before other folk became aware of them, and the world being, after all, full of strange creatures beyond count, these little people seemed of very little importance. This line seems to have inspired Nori's speech in the trailer.
There's wonders in this world, beyond our wandering.
Yet Tolkien's history of hobbits qua hobbits starts at the beginning of the Third Age, saying they lived by the Greenwood until...
A sickness lies over the Greenwood. The woodsmen who live there now call it Mirkwood.
And they moved west. We do know that before hobbits crossed the mountains, they were divided into three somewhat different breeds: Harfoots, Stores, and Fellowhides. The Harfoots were browner of skin, smaller, shorter, and they were beardless and bootless. Tolkien says the Harfoots roamed west early, but in the context, I think he meant early in the Third Age, and by implication, they would be firmly grounded in northeastern Middle-earth during the Second Age. However, as Tolkien would not say definitively, and we know a lot can happen in 1,000 years, so who's to say the Harfoots of Elder Days didn't have a wandering period?
The road goes on, ever on.
Harfoot Elder Sadak gives a sound explanation of their culture. We're a nomadic tribe, moving with the weather and the fertility of crops. We have big caravans on wooden wheels, and we're very good at hiding because humans are much bigger than us and bring trouble. I actually like the idea of seeing wandering small folk bringing their hearth and home and merriment all round Eriador, while, quote, greater men, elves and dwarves make ready for war. Provided little Nori, who shares a name with Sam's daughter, doesn't do anything too historically significant. The show promises Harfoots are the traditional Tolkien little guy. Traditionally, the little people in this world provide comedy, but also get to be incredibly brave. You're going to see us run the full gamut of emotions and actions in this adventure. And I can live with that. The other Broken Blade. In addition to the Empire article, we were introduced to Theo, Bronwyn's son and apparent bearer of a broken black blade.
Try saying that 5 times faster.
I've got very little to say about this. It's a complete original. Tolkien was very clear that much of what happened in the Second Age had been forgotten, or rather excluded from history by the elves. Only the elves preserve any records of that vanished time, and their traditions are concerned almost entirely with their own history, in which men appear seldom and hobbits are not mentioned at all. So the show has to carefully balance these new characters. Bronwyn's plot must be meaningful enough to engage the audience, and I'd be willing that McKay's hypotheticals in the Empire article come from Bronwyn's storyline. What's it like to have one orc in your face, in your kitchen? What's it like trying to kill an orc when you've never killed an orc before? While also not making Bronwyn's role so important that the elves who survive don't look like complete jerks for forgetting Bronwyn and her family.
And some things that should not have been forgotten were lost.
Tolkien never attempted to write a precise history of the Second Age. He does note in Appendix F that Pelargir, a major Numenor port at the mouths of the Anduin, is where common speech began. Since we know Bronwyn and co. come from the south, they might stop by there, maybe on their way to Numenor to warn the king about the darkness growing in the south. The Second Age's story can be fleshed out, but how much flesh can you add to a story before it becomes Frankenstein's monster? Worthy of Tolkien. The biggest promise The Rings of Power is making is that it will be worthy of Tolkien. The showrunners promises the story came from Tolkien, and we're just stewards of it. We trust those ideas so deeply because they're not ours. We're custodians at best. However, they also explain Tolkien's vision as part of what makes these stories so special is their optimism and life-affirming humanism. I think this aims far lower than the beatific vision Tolkien saw in his works, but Jackson aimed no higher than humanism, and he did all right. Jackson, at least, had a complete vision for his whole trilogy and wrote his adaptation just as intentionally as Tolkien had written his original. There was no sequel bait. Each scene had a purpose for the present plot that organically grew from the story around the main characters. So the whole first installment was its own thing, yet it set itself up perfectly for the next chapter. If The Rings of Power can deliver such storytelling, then I will be willing to overlook whatever is going on with Bronwyn's dress here. The trap I fear the show will fall into is the same trap that certain other shows and even movies fall into. That is taking the midpoint of the story, a time when we should be getting to know our protagonist best, and instead focusing on extra world building to tease the audience and ensure they come back for the sequel. The Wheel of Time did this.
We bonded, and I had to become worthy of her.
Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness did this, where instead of learning about America Chavez as a character, we learn about multiverses that are not relevant in any way to the final resolution. We can easily trace this crucial error back to all the failed extended universes who tried to compete with the MCU. So it's ironic that Marvel is now falling into the same trap. Hollywood keeps making this error because it's easier to provide sequel bait than solid story. The Rings of Power, like every other series, does promise not to feed us bait. It's a 50-hour movie. That's really how we've approached The Rings of Power, says McKay, explaining how, unlike practically all other TV shows, which survive from season to season based on ratings, Amazon has already commissioned 5 seasons, which the duo have already mapped out in full. I appreciate this promise with marked skepticism. Though there is reason to believe the Rings of Power showrunners, as they already have been locked in for 5 seasons. Unlike The Wheel of Time, the Rings of Power isn't fishing for enough seasons to finish their tale. They just have to be good enough not to be canceled. Hopefully, the showrunners will take the breathing space Amazon has given them and make something great with it. If not, I will be thoroughly disappointed. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you would like to see more. Your patronage is greatly appreciated.